Welcome to the
Recording in progress.
welcome to this special Transportation Circulation Committee meeting. My name is Andres Malvos, Committee Chair. We're going to commence our meeting at 5:30, so if we can kick off a roll call.
Committee Member Metzenberg.
Here.
Committee Member Rodriguez.
Here.
Committee Member Siegschlag.
Here.
Committee Member Smith.
Here.
Vice Chair Blackerby.
Here.
Chair Malavos.
Here.
Committee Member Bickford is absent. We have a quorum. Thank you.
Thank you for that. All right. So I guess up next, Ms. Grant, if there are any changes to the, or modifications to the agenda for tonight?
No modifications to the agenda tonight.
Okay. Well, then we have opportunity for public comment, both in person and online. So if there's anyone, I guess we start with in person.
Chair Malavos, we have no public comment slips at this time.
In person or online?
No.
Okay. Okay, so then I guess we can go straight into the announcements. So Ms. Grant, I'll pass it to you.
One announcement that you may have read is that the Santa Barbara County Association of Governments, along with Caltrans, just recently awarded $132 million for a portion of the 101 freeway project. So it's the 101 HOV and widening project. So this particular section is a part in the county, and then a small section is in the city of Santa Barbara. It does not fund the entire freeway. There's still a small segment in the city that involves small but large, the Cabrillo interchange. That still needs to be funded, and SBCAG and Caltrans team are actively trying to seek funding for that final phase. But you may have read about it in the papers or seen it on the news of that recent announcement. And that is all for announcements. Okay.
Excellent, thank you. So I guess we can dive straight into tonight's staff report.
Yes, let's do it.
All right.
So tonight, this is going, just to preface, it's a longer presentation than our normal presentations that we have before this committee. So bear with me. It's about 45 minutes approximately. So I will be taking questions at the end just so I can get through the majority of the content. Very excited, though, to talk about State Street for the transportation history and then future considerations. Why future considerations? Because we're in the State Street master planning effort, which is also known as Create State. And that is a process, I think I said at our last meeting that we might have concepts to plans to be reviewing. We're not quite there yet. But you will, as a committee, be seeing some of the future concepts for State Street. But before we do that, I think it's really important to understand how the State Street came to be and its current design, its temporary design, and what's essentially happening from a land use perspective, and why land use and transportation are so connected, and really what the transportation considerations should be. There's, again, for the Create State, there's a whole bunch of guiding principles. Transportation is one spoke on the overall bigger picture. But this is something that we will be discussing at the State Street Advisory Committee. But this is, I thought it was very important to go to the Transportation Circulation Committee. So as we go through and present, I present this presentation today, sort of for the history and the future considerations. Are we leaving anything out? Do you have a good understanding of what the trade-offs are? Because ultimately, that's what we want the community to understand. Because at the end of the day, this will be it's a community-driven project, but we want to make sure it's very clear of what it means when you might change this in the right of way. What's sort of the domino effect from a transportation perspective? So again, these are the highlights. This is sort of how the presentation is broken down today. And again, excited to get all of your feedback if we as staff are missing everything. So in your attachment 2 was the very long sort of history and considerations. So you've already have been briefed a little bit. The presentation goes into a little bit more detail on those, and really after we have this presentation, what's missing, what could be refined when we go before the State Street Advisory Committee, and as we just talk to the community in general. So creation of State Street, I'm not starting from the, since Santa Barbara was incorporated, we're just gonna jump right into the 1960s. And so 1960s was a time, I love the old time photos, but the downtown was very vibrant, and it was definitely, State Street was more car-centric that you see in the image. Lots of, again, pedestrian volumes, but we had narrower sidewalks. As we moved into the late 60s, there was what we were experiencing in Santa Barbara is what many cities in California were experiencing, and in the U.S. as well, was sort of the death of downtowns, and then with the car just moving to suburban areas. And so when we relate it to what was happening in our Santa Barbara County, is then we had a lot of growth happening Upper State Street area, unincorporated, Goleta area as well. And that's where we had the birth of our first suburban plaza, known as La Cumbre Plaza, that came in the late 60s. So that drew everybody sort of from the downtown into the outdoor mall there. And at the time, there's how do we get people back downtown? So downtown is also vibrant, and so there was a beautification committee formed to bring back State Street to encourage people coming downtown. These are images also that were included in your report, but sort of snapshots over time. And really, State Street evolved from the next phase from kind of the 70s all the way to the early 2000s of different iterations. What I remember when I first came, it was all the changing out of materials, and it was a redevelopment project to get bricks on State Street. And the original plaza was from Ortega to Victoria Streets, and then it was expanded down to Haley Streets. So the lower right image is what you see in sort of its current form. Again, with the brick sidewalks, the beautiful street trees. We went from, yes, kind of a concrete area from the 60s to just a really beautiful urban forest in our downtown. So this is an image, I just grabbed it off of Google, it's circa, I think, 2012. What we have as far as the State Street canvas is 80 feet. So what do you do with those 80 feet? So during the time as State Street evolved, this had, again, pre-pandemic, it was a north and southbound travel lane. We had on-street bike lanes, and then sidewalks were approximately 15 feet or wider. This is the image of the same block, 1,000 block of State Street. And again, all that, so the actual, this is just interim. This was never meant to be look and feel in a permanent configuration. And you still have, of course, all the curb lines, et cetera. So really the only thing that changed was, well, we had temporary removal of vehicles other than service vehicles on State Street and emergency vehicles, but opened up for cycling and and basically the pedestrian plaza. And so we have different in treatments now, again, just interim. And then for as far as the roadway, we've repaved without any striping at this point in time. And so, again, you all know the history for we were in an economic crisis, and when everything shut down, businesses, in order to operate, we expanded all the outdoor dining facilities, and that's what you still see in an interim configuration. And that was just approved to still stay in an interim configuration till about, I think it's 2026, unless the State Street, if there's decisions on the State Street, Crate Street master planning effort ahead of that. So who went downtown? Historically, it was tourists, residents, workers, really all different modes of transportation, from walking, biking, driving, and in transit. So before I go into each of these modes for considerations of what to think about from, again, a transportation perspective, I want to take a few steps back, and we're gonna zoom out, and we're kind of going over sort of what did our general plan say? The general plan for cities, that's our blueprint for the city, and how we develop an allocation of resources, et cetera. So I'm going to spend this next section discussing what's going on. And so the general plan, our last major update was in 2011. It really focused on strategically placed growth to increase housing. We've had a really housing production lull compared to other decades, so how could we get more housing in our community? And then also a focus on transportation demand management, looking at vehicle congestion reductions. And then over the past sort of couple decades too is all the downtown parking facilities and all of that came in. So the general plan, when you go through it, where was the big focus of growth? Well, it's the downtown area. It's so that's the green area on the map. As you know, there's lots of other neighborhoods underneath the downtown, but generally speaking, this was the area. If there was going to be increased density, this is the focus. And why? Because it's already part of our grid. It's already has a lot of the amenities for walking and biking, transit. And also it has from a vehicle congestion, the least amount of traffic. So for example, if you live in area 1 or 2, you not always need to have a vehicle. You have choices. You're right. Everything's generally very walkable, bikeable, or transit access. There's lots of stops in that downtown core. Versus if you live in area 4, like towards the outer State Street areas, towards 154, chances are you are making most of your trips via vehicle. So again, if you were going to have density, you go into the area that's very walkable, bikeable. This is a map. This is our existing land uses today. I'm not going to go over every single color, but let's see. Can you see with the mouse? Yes. So what I do want you to take away again is we already have a lot of growth and density in our downtown area. A little hard to tell from as far where I am, but in the orange, those are all residential. All the purple colors are all mixed use developments that we have already in our downtown area. Oh, the colors washed out. This is now, we're zoomed out before of the whole city, zooming in to State Street and the study area. some of the colors aren't showing up, but there's approximately just right on State Street, our block off, there's about 220 residential units already, just in that small adjacent, promenade adjacent. What we have right now in our land development process in the queue is about 187 residential units. So why is that? Why are we seeing development there? Well, again, as part of the general plan general plan element, there was the average unit density program, also called the multi-unit housing program, really to incentivize development in the downtown. There's been some amendments over the years for it, but essentially the biggest density is right in your downtown, approximately 28 to 36 units per acre. And then medium density, just right outside of that core, is 15 to 27 dwelling units per acre. Since the program has been in effect, there's been approximately, see how quickly I could add in my head, 450 units that are in the ground now, just sort of in this immediate area, some in the upper State Street area as well. Those are all the red dots. If it's not a red dot, it's something that's either building permit issued or pending through our development process that we're anticipating coming through. Okay, so besides multifamily, then there's accessory dwelling units. That was state incentive to get, again, more housing. Not that everybody, all accessory dwelling units are occupied, but everywhere where you see a green dot is now accessory dwelling unit. That's about 467 as of, I believe it was last week. And there's about 500 in the process right now. So with all of those units in the residential units in the queue, what's also is state mandates. We have to update our housing element. That's currently going in the process. It's called the 2023-2031 housing element. There's different numbers from RENA. It's about 8,000 units that need to come in a certain amount of time. What the housing element is looking at is approximately 5,400 units given existing and forecasted resources by 2035. But bottom line, there will be still thousands of more residential units coming to the city. So I've talked about sort of the residential side. I thought that this was an interesting graphic. A few years back, there was an economic analysis really focusing in the downtown area for Cosmont. What do we have? So we see all the residential units as trying to bring residential closer to jobs. There's, again, these are statistics from 2019, but there's roughly 23,000 jobs just in the downtown area alone, and 40% of those jobs in the city are within that downtown area. And 33% of downtown employees live within about 10 miles of the city. Just want to put it in perspective. So another thing, besides sort of the city policy side, some of the state legislation, there's additional legislation that just went into effect this year in January. And it has to do with, again, trying to get more housing in the state of California. And sort of the incentive for more housing is to not provide parking for land development projects, because as you know, that when you talk about parking garages, that's a huge expense to the developer that then is passed on to future either renters trying to live in the downtown area. So in theory, when you build without parking, that keeps the costs lower. And so the incentive is if you're within a half a mile of a high transit corridor, and this particular definition for this legislation, the qualifying ones is the MTD Transit Center, which is about a block off state at Chapala, Carrillo, and the other qualifying area is Amtrak. And so going again a half a mile from, those are the sort of the buffer circles. They're in the future there isn't a parking requirement for those. So what is it sort of between our city regulations and state regulations? How does that affect downtown? What it affects is that more housing in downtown with fewer to no parking spaces provided. Because of that, because there is going to be less parking amenities, that means that the active transportation and alternative transportation needs to be very strong because the parking supply will be impacted. So what we're really seeing is downtown, instead of sort of the drive and leave of downtown, it's more the live and work. So if you had to take away from all the slides that I just showed, because each slide can be its own 8-hour presentation, is that downtown's evolving. It's becoming more of a neighborhood, and State Street is the core. And really, when we talk about, so now there's that big task to create the core again. We're at that time. And the visioning principles, that's what I included in attachment 1. That's the State Street Advisory Committee. That's what they're going to have to weigh. That's what City Council is going to have to weigh is, will these concepts that are put before the community, will this revitalize downtown? Will it create a safe experience? Will it enhance economic revitalization? Will it be people-centric? Will it facilitate housing in downtown? How do we get that downtown identity back again? Again, we've went through that season of the suburban sprawl and then trying to get the new identity, and we're ready for an updated identity. And then still, you will still have people that live away from the downtown core. So how do you still continue to have that as a center attraction and really design for locals? So, with all of that, that's the foundation of what we're looking at. Downtown's changing, building a new neighborhood. Let's dive in now from a transportation perspective of what that looks like. So I'm going to go through each mode of transportation. All right, let's start with walking. Again, this is the top right image is just a very old photo and how downtown was originally laid out. It was laid out in 500 foot blocks. And so it really just by design lent itself to being very walkable. So in 2006, there was the pedestrian master plan. And at the time, yes, State Street is one of our bigger right-of-ways. State Street has the highest volumes of pedestrians in the city. And it's been a model. It's not only a local, regional, but nationwide model for sort of how at the time had for allocation for pedestrians. And so what you see out there today is basically a 15-foot cross-section where you have about 8 of those feet for the through pedestrian zone. But what we're realizing now, and with the growing population, that 15 feet might not be enough anymore. And that's what the pedestrian master plan flagged in 2006. It said, hey, this is what we're building now. This makes sense, but we envision as the community grows that we'll need additional space. Right now, the volumes of pedestrians is around 8,000 pedestrians per day. And, but again, we anticipate, and what we're hearing from the Create State effort and the outreach is we really need to increase those amenities more. So again, when you look at the future concepts for State Street, it's really for one of the considerations is just to expand the pedestrian space and amenities. This is from the Cosmont report. It was the blue dot just happened to be a point on the pedestrian plaza or promenade area that's roughly Paseo Nuevo, I think. But what I liked about the graphic on the left just shows what a 5-minute walk looks like, what a 10-minute walk, what a 15-minute walk is. And so if we, as our team, is transportation professionals and projects that have gone before the Transportation Circulation Committee, is to try to get rid of those stresses in the pedestrian network. So a lot of what you've seen over the years in this committee has been a lot of safety projects, intersection projects, really to decrease the amount of time, crossing time pedestrians are getting from one side of the street to the other. So again, that area for the State Street to be really strong and thriving, that other area within that sort of 15-minute walk needs to be very strong. So that's something, it's a whole other effort, but that's what we monitor to just get people to and from State Street. Let's talk about biking. So, bicycle master plan, the last major update was in 2016, and this was just a snapshot here of the 2016 bicycle master plan, of the facilities versus existing and proposed. And as you know, last year we came with a map update, so we have the map as current as 2022, and then we hope to return to the Transportation Circulation Committee because we've been working on GIS for updating all the facilities, so that will be a future presentation. But really what came out of that was State Street, from the community wanted State Street as the spine of the city's bike network. So everything from State Street beyond was really just to connect and to feed into State Street. So why was State Street chosen as the spine? It was really because of all the key destinations. It's, again, the core of downtown. And yeah, whether you're going to a restaurant or retail or a public facility, a park, etc. Another reason it's popular, so besides State Street being very popular for cycling, Waterfront is also another very popular area. Well, State Street is the street that has the connection into the waterfront where you're not competing with freeway on and off ramps like some of the other connections into downtown. So making that a very favorable route. What we see on State Street as far as for pedestrian volumes now is about 2,000 cyclists per day. But again, just to put the framework for what's happening on the land use side, we anticipate increased demand for strong biking facilities, whether it's on the spine or close to, and then from the spine, again, getting to downtown. One of the items before State Street Plaza turned into the interim State Street Promenade, here were some of the collision patterns that we were seeing on State Street. A lot of it had to do with right-turning vehicles and the cyclists. I grabbed an image just from, I think, the San Francisco Bike Coalition, but this is what was the comment. So when we did our Vision Zero mapping of severe injury collision data, State Street was very bright red. And again, when you dive into the collision statistics, that was the common one. So even before the pandemic, that was something that we were looking at, was what, besides the current on-street bike lanes, how can we make this a higher level facility? So what has been nice, just in the pilot form of this temporary promenade, is because there are no vehicles on State Street at the moment, that right turn collision pattern was essentially eliminated. But as you know, cycling, there's a lot of comments about cyclists on State Street and the friction between users. I think I just had one scenario in the written report, but I want to go through a couple scenarios to think about when it comes to cycling. So the first scenario is if vehicles do not return to State Street, other than, again, emergency access or delivery vehicles, what do you think should happen? And I think what we're hearing again from the community is that there still always continues to be friction between road users. So it's pedestrian, cyclists, and then still friction because there's cars at the intersection still on State Street. And to really, because there isn't really necessarily a channel of the cyclists, so there's some bit unpredictable behaviors. And so I think the consideration for the future concepts, if bicycling facilities are on State Street, is to have a separate facility for cyclists. So there is to minimize those conflicts with pedestrians. Another scenario is that there's one vehicle lane that returns to State Street. And that could be, like, again, either temporary or permanent. The graphic turned out a little bit too small. Looks a little bit better behind you guys. But again, it's to look at, in this case, if there was a vehicle lane, the cycling facilities would be on the left. So again, you wouldn't have that right turning conflict at the intersections. And then again, pedestrians are still maybe on the widened sidewalk areas, but again, there's a defined space for cyclists. There's a third scenario to consider, and this is again what we're hearing from the community, is just remove the cyclists from State Street. The problem is we still need a north-south route, wherever that may be. So the paralleling streets to State Street are Chapala and Anacapa. Chapala and Anacapa have very high road volumes. So just painting an on-street bike lane is not enough for that. We would still recommend having a separated bike facility. That said, it's more complicated. What's nice about State Street is there's no driveways. You still have intersection conflicts, but you don't have driveways. You don't have parking. So from a walking and biking standpoint, it's a lot lower stress route. So even if we were to have separated bike facilities, Chapala and Anacapa, both, you still have to navigate driveways. And I just happen to have, I think the image on the top is just north of the MTD Transit Center. What's also unique about a lot of the driveways is they're very large driveways that it's adjacent to. And every single block presents its own unique design issues. And so I'm not going to go through every single block tonight, but that's something that we want to communicate to for the public, is it's not so easy just to relocate, that there's trade-offs. And so because Chapala and Anacapa really are the utility streets, the back of house for a lot of operations, it comes at the expense of parking removal or a lane, travel lane removal. And then there's sort of the domino effect of how that happens then with the rest of the circulation. And also, whatever parallel north-south facility it is, you still have to get to it. So then the zero blocks are also involved. Zero blocks still also have very high roadway volumes. And so that was something, again, that we would recommend as a separated bike facility just to get to the north-south route. Same thing is deliveries happen on State Street in the early morning. Where do the deliveries outside of the morning happen? Well, they're all happening on the side streets. And so, again, we'd have to be looking at a travel lane removal or a parking removal. And those are very precious curb space for that as well. Could this happen? Could it be designed? It could. It just is complicated. Let's move into driving. So, we'll still have people driving to our downtown. It's something that we have to accommodate. That's with all the residences that will be downtown, all the commercial uses. You still need all the delivery trucks. You need all the maintenance. You still need all of those uses. Again, I love the graphics that were in the Cosmot report, but this was in red. Just shows us sort of what's a 5-minute drive, a 10-minute drive, 15-minute drive. But everything's in our areas pretty close to get people to downtown. So when State Street Plaza was designed, it was very deliberate to be that drive-through plaza. And again, no driveways, no parking, so not the friction, just to experience the joy. There's a lot of emotion just from longtime residents of sort of really good, fond memories of just being able to experience and drive down State Street. Again, just even as for walking and biking when you don't have the driveway friction or parking friction, as when you're driving, then that's easy too. You don't have those other stresses to navigate. But again, like, will driving be completely eliminated off of State Street? The answer is no. Again, you still need to have like deliveries, commercial loading in some level, and emergency access. What's unique about our downtown versus some other downtowns is we don't have alleys in behind. A lot of downtown have the back of house alleys. We don't, so State Street still needs to be able to have some sort of vehicular access. And what we found too is just, again, even when we closed down State Street, because it was more the cruising street, it wasn't really the utility. So there wasn't really noticeable like addition of traffic that came to Chapala and Anacapa streets. So considerations when we think about driving, as I mentioned before, the top images is that we've had in other presentations, and I think this was also a presentation that went to the State Street Advisory Council. Was just sort of the day in the life of operations that sometimes you see, and a lot of times it's when you're sleeping at night when all the cleaning and is being done. Again, emergency access, we do have taller buildings that we need to have a ladder truck for. That's just an image just of a fire truck just to show the amount of real estate you need for emergency access. And that's just the fire truck. Usually in an emergency, you'll have other vehicles for police cars, ambulance, et cetera, also needing the space allocation as well. So as a subset to driving, you need to park. And what's really nice about our downtown is there's immediately 10 parking facilities right off of the plaza or promenade area. We have, generally speaking, three types of parkers: customers, employees, residential customers. Typically, you're probably outside of the peak times. It's made higher turnover. The downtown parking, it was we have the first 75 minutes free, and then paid parking from there. But compared to a lot of cities, that's a very, very low cost again. And a lot of the model has been set up for you drive, you park once, and then you can use other ways of travel from there. The hardest part for when we think of parking too is employees. And then I discussed that in a little bit more detail in the history, is trying to keep the employees out of the residential areas, but you don't, and then trying to also not impact the customer parking. It's that balance, but from like a vehicle congestion, you don't want the employees doing the 75-minute shuffle. That's common. And then there's also residential. Right now, the residential parking permits are extremely low. It will be interesting to see as more housing comes into downtown to see if that's a demand on the parking facilities or not. But bottom line, and this was discussed back in 2011, is that because there's not going to be parking on private properties, that will be limited. What we anticipate is the on-street parking to be in demand, and together with the parking facilities and on-street parking, all of that together really needs to be managed. The best effective tool is to do dynamic pricing. Don't want to go into too much detail on this one, but it's essentially that there's a premium put on a curb at certain times a day, and it's priced in such a way that if you want to pay whatever that price is, that there will always be curb space for you to do that. If you don't want to pay whatever that price is, then you go into a parking lot, surface parking lot, or downtown parking garage. What it's supposed to help is to eliminate all the circling around of blocks and to create really, I'm coming downtown, I will park on the street, or I will go immediately to a garage. And so, again, it's a good way to manage parking, and then from an environmental standpoint, it decreases vehicle miles traveled, greenhouse gas emissions, all of that. Let's move into transit. So, what had been running since the early 90s was the Metropolitan Transit District. Ran a shuttle between the downtown and waterfront neighborhoods. I think I had a it was 75 minutes to ride, but I believe it was 50 cents to ride the shuttle. So kind of like that, again, like that park once, but if you wanted to, wherever parking garage you were at and you wanted to get to the waterfront, and then instead of getting back in your car to go to the waterfront, you could pay 50 cents to get down there, or I think it was $1 per day. If you were a senior citizen or person with disabilities, I believe it was 25 cents. That service was suspended during the pandemic and has not returned yet, mainly due to budget constraints. There was a pretty big subsidy for that, and that the city had trouble with from year to year meeting that extra cost. But there was recently, just through the Create State effort, and then committee member Hillary Blackerby, who has been doing a lot of that, also works at the Metropolitan Transit District. There is a lot of community support for a shuttle returning. And that's a big topic. Does that return to State Street? Does it operate on the parallel streets, the side streets? What does that look like? I think when we think of transportation, again, we're going to see increase for active transportation. We're going to see, I think, an increased demand for public transit as well as an effective way to get downtown and through the promenade. So that will be a continued discussion. And there's certain things that as transportation committee is to, these are the certain things to ask, and that this is when it goes through for the State Street Advisory Council too, is, well, what are the considerations? Well, fleet type, does it still stay in that model? Is it smaller? Is it larger? Maybe it's dependent upon the time of day, maybe earlier mornings, it's a smaller shuttle, larger shuttle, evenings, I don't know, but that's what needs to be discussed. Hours and days of services, areas served, and really whatever, where, how, and where the shuttle returns, is we need to make it safe, and that there's ample sidewalk area to stage, everything's meets ADA, again, whether it's on the promenade or promenade adjacent. Another item that went, that's recent, and it's been at discussions with the Transportation Circulation Committee. This is another very viable public transportation option, and that's bike share. And that came as a pilot. It's still in the pilot phase for now a few more years. But again, I won't go into too much detail here because but for those maybe listening remote or in the audience, it's bike share is a point-to-point transportation option, really used when it's too far to walk, but maybe your destination is still too close to drive. What we're seeing as far as in the pilot phase is very promising. We started with, this is an all-electric bike fleet. It started with 75 e-bikes in operation. We're at 260 e-bikes with about 87 different stations right now. We just tipped over the 1 million miles ridden for bike share users. Really, this is a low-cost way to travel in downtown. And surrounding areas. Again, we've talked about for regionally expanding this as well. So for the Create State, for the considerations, we feel strongly that the B-cycle stations to continue either on the promenade, if cyclist is removed from State Street, then promenade adjacent. But you can see this was just a smaller version of the heat map, just sort of a snapshot in time of overuses, but the big green blob is State Street. It's very well used in the waterfront as well. And then from those areas, you could tell into the neighborhoods. How's everybody doing? This is the last section. It's a lot. Is it good? Okay. So, final push. There's some other transportation-related options to consider. So, one of the things that has also come up, this was a specific topic, I believe, over the past year or so since the temporary promenade, was why hasn't the 400 block of State Street been included in the promenade? And this is a little bit, more complicated, and the reason why it's still open for vehicular traffic. But the image on the left showed what the grid used to look like before the 101 freeway came in. And when the 101 freeway did come in, all of those street and grid connections was reduced just to State Street. So State Street becomes the funnel. And this becomes a lot more complicated. I think the original presentation had 40 slides. of its own. But what happens when you close off State Street? Again, because that's the funnel to then get into the waterfront. So the biggest issue was, and why it's still open for vehicles right now, is due to emergency access. And general circulation. What we're evaluating right now, we're in the process of updating the citywide traffic model. And so what's being modeled is future traffic of anticipated growth to see if either State Street, that 400 block, could potentially close. That would mean Chapala to Gutierrez, if you were going towards the waterfront, because Gutierrez is one way right now, going westbound. We'd have to introduce a lane, a travel lane, two westerly travel lanes to one travel lane going west and then one going east. And what does that look like in terms of emergency access and response times? How does that also affect transit, active transportation needs? Again, I think that we're seeing in some of the preliminary data, need to follow it more, that maybe just looking at one way on State Street as a potential. But again, we'll have better numbers or soon that we're looking at. With the 400 block, there's right now the actual curb to curb is about 50 feet, so that is larger than our current curb to curb in the blocks north. That's approximately 39 feet. So there is the potential for this block to be enhanced, to have wider pedestrian amenities, so for it to have that sort of same feeling as the other blocks. But how do you reallocate then space for the rest of the users, from cycling to vehicle access? So again, maybe looking at a one-way configuration on that. So that's just south of the promenade. We're now going to take you just north of the promenade, 1300 block of State Street. That's where the Arlington Theater is. And so in its current form, it's in a temporary configuration. It has just one northbound lane instead of a northbound and southbound lane. So the southbound lane was repurposed for some outdoor dining, diagonal parking. Cyclists can still go southbound on that stretch, but vehicles cannot go southbound. Sort of like the 400 block, there's opportunities to expand pedestrian amenities on that block. Again, there's a break. There's at this point in time, the brick sidewalks everywhere else, and then there's a cut, and this is part of like the theater district. So trying to pull in that identity there. And so looking again at maybe making that a permanent one-way traffic lane. What's under analysis right now, as you know, we've been working, it's in construction right now, is the West Side and East Side Community Paseos projects that came out of the Bicycle Master Plan. And what the community had wanted was strong connections within the West Side and East Side neighborhoods, and from there into downtown. The downtown route that was chosen by the community was Solis Street. So it's the one leg of Solis. So in order to make that a strong biking route, you need to have the vehicle volumes low. So if you're driving into downtown from Upper State Street to downtown, because of Solis Street is, you cannot go south, continue right now, just in the temporary. You divert then and you make a left turn on the Sola to then go down Anacapa into downtown. So once construction is complete for the bicycle boulevard on Sola Street, we'll be looking at the traffic volumes for that. So, because again, traffic volumes need to be lower. And because if they're too high, then it doesn't make it an all-aged biking facility. So there's a couple ways to handle it. And there could be where you have one-way traffic, 1300 block and then 1400 block. So vehicles are turning on Mitchell Terrena instead of Sola. So that's one potential solution. One potential is that we don't trigger the higher traffic volumes and it can remain as one way on the 1300 block. So that's what will be under analysis. I've already discussed the parallel streets, Chapala and Acapa, as it relates to bike facilities. And then side streets to the plaza from Haley. So in the written report, we had certain recommendations where the side streets are smaller. They don't have the wide sidewalks like State Street. The right-of-way is not as large compared to State Street, but there is the potential to have wider sidewalks on the side streets. But that's at the expense of on-street parking or potentially a traffic lane removal. And the same thing for enhanced bike facilities that could also, again, at the expense of on-street parking removal, traffic lane removal. So all of this really boils down to a right-of-way is finite, and it's an issue of trade-offs. And so I want to make sure that for what was written, what was presented today, if those trade-offs are clear as we move forward with the process. And clear to you too, when you see concepts, that those trade-offs are clear. And that not only clear for you, clear for the State Street Advisory Council, that will be sort of the next stop in discussions. And at the community, because at the end of the day, it's the community's project that will be constructed. And then the other big takeaway is, where do you put the bike facility, north and south? Does it stay on State Street, or does it move? And really, that north-south bike facility decision really affects the space allocation for the State Street design. So here's where we would like your feedback. So the first question is, again, regarding the transportation history of the State Street Plaza. Are there any refinements needed, details missing that would provide transportation insights and understanding as we go before the State Street Advisory Committee and community when reviewing the preliminary concepts? And again, is there anything, or to add that number 2 is to assist in the understanding of those trade-offs, again, when evaluating those concepts. So with that concludes. Thank you for bearing with me. This was, again, a longer presentation than normal, but it's just, there's a lot to cover. Just even when you're looking, there's so many issues as it relates to the future of State Street, but just this topic alone, there's a lot of detail to it. So I think with that, yeah, any questions and comments, and we'll let Chair Malavos take it from here. Yeah.
Sure, so, committee,
Just a second. I'm thinking, I don't think any of us want, there's so many individual things to discuss. Maybe content questions first quickly and then just comments. Otherwise, we could kind of go on a long time. Because I have just a few specific questions that I've
Sure.
reserved.
Sure.
Is that all right
go
with
ahead.
you? Okay. this first one. Oh, this is embarrassing that I don't know the answer to this. It's on. It's on, isn't it? My microphone?
Oh, bring it a little bit closer to.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know the answer. Are the shuttles working at all on Cabrillo or just not at all? Cabrillo Boulevard? No, they're not at all. I saw a shuttle bus the other day. Was it being used as a transit bus on Chapala?
So, yes, that was announced, like, there's a shuttle, and I don't know too much of the details, but it's the Santa Barbara Chamber of Commerce, downtown Santa Barbara, with they're calling it a pilot shuttle, that would run Chapala and Anacapa down, and also to the waterfront area, just a few stops.
But do you mean the MTD ones? You saw one.
Well, I saw one of the ones that used to be used
Yeah,
for the.
it's still being used, mostly on the line 3.
Okay, well,
Yeah,
threw me
Yeah.
off a little.
Yes.
yeah, totally.
And then
Smart,
there's
it looks the
still
same way.
all the service, yes, going, there's other lines operating in the downtown. And then, yeah, this, at the transit center. What's missing right now is that up and down State Street, because State Street is currently closed for vehicles.
There was another one. Oh, and I guess this is just, how full are the parking lots now? You're talking about people doing the 75-minute shuffle, but I saw something on one of these meetings I watched that parking lots are not really very full. So I can't figure that out. That's a contradiction.
Yes, thank you, Committee Member Rodriguez, through the chair. That's something that I can provide for the discussions or the future. I don't have each metric for each facility, but we do keep all of those metrics. And no, they're not fully maxed out right now. And part of it also is there's been a limited enforcement of 75 minutes on State Street and the 15 minutes. And I think there's more people parking on street right now because of that.
And this is my last one, and then I'll get back to being in order. When is the underpass improvement going to happen? We talked about that
Yes.
a long time ago, but it feels like it's integral to what you were
Yes.
just discussing.
I'm glad you asked. At council, I should have included that in my announcement. I apologize. Construction contract goes to council this Tuesday. Yes, and then hopefully shortly thereafter begins construction. And for those that aren't familiar with the State Street Underpass project, it's to, again, address collision patterns that we were seeing between Gutierrez and Yalinali streets. To remedy that, we're essentially doubling the pedestrian space under the underpass. So the sidewalks get widened, and then the bike lanes going underneath the underpass are buffered. So just again, finite space, real allocation of space, and then one vehicle lanes reduced to one southbound lane, one northbound lane. Center lane is for emergency access.
I have a question, so I assume for any of the considerations or scenarios that there'd be a minimum width for fire lane or, and just remind me what that width is?
20 feet.
All right, thanks.
Jessica, that was a phenomenal presentation. That's a whole lot to think about. I wanted to say there's one thing I'd like to see also. I don't know if you guys are aware of this. A few months ago, I got an email from the city to take a survey on, it was just out to the general public, not the committee or anyone, on what the citizens feel the downtown State Street should look like. I took that survey. I assume many of you guys did, and probably thousands of other people in this town. I feel we'd be negligent to not have the results for that survey in front of this committee. I mean, I certainly would want to know what the general public feels State Street should look like as part of my decision making.
Okay. Thank you for that. That's, yes, the survey response, and in the audience too is Tess Harris. She's the State Street or Create State Master Planner. Yes, all of that has all been recorded, from the surveys to all the various meetings, visioning meetings, all of that. So you had a little bit of a sliver from attachment 1 and the guiding, and some feedback from the community as it came from the surveys. But certainly when we bring back the concepts, that's something that I can have a link to. Oh, and then Ms. Harris, if she wants to add a little bit more, I would appreciate that.
Thank you. Good evening. My name's Tess Harris. I'm the State Street Master Planner for the City of Santa Barbara. So the survey, I think that you're referencing, we had a survey that went out from November and closed in January of this year. Of the responses, we had 79% of those that took the survey indicated that they wanted to see the street closed to vehicles. We didn't ask whether that was the full length or a partial length, but that nearly 80% percentage is obviously a very high rate. There was some difference of opinion in terms of bikes and shuttles, both in the survey responses as well as when we had a design workshop that occurred in December over 2 days. We had about 500 people attend those workshops. For the survey responses, we had about 6,000 responses, and so we had a bit of fluctuation there. The shuttles in particular, we had majority of people in the surveys indicated that they wanted to see, or more than 60% had indicated that they wanted to see shuttles around the perimeter of State Street. And then when we had the design workshops on State Street in the December timeframe, there was more of a mixed response, or a more tendency for people to indicate that they wanted to see them on State Street. So really that's a bit of a fluctuation there. Really similar with bikes as well. We had a real mixed response in the survey responses. I don't have the exact percentages off the top of my head, but I can get those to the committee as well. And I'll be in the audience if you have other questions for me.
I actually was just, could you outline the next few steps in this process? Because I'm trying to figure out, like, is this my last best chance to comment as part of this group, or will this come back, and kind of what are the iterations going from here?
Yeah, I'll answer it, but please, Ms. Harris, add to that. This is just to set the foundation for us for future discussion when we do see the concepts. So this is not your last chance. It's really the foundation for the future discussion. But Ms. Harris, if you could add just kind of the general time frame for the State Street Master Planning and approximate time frame when we might see concepts.
Sure. So we will be going back to the State Street Advisory Committee in August with revised concepts, but really those concepts are going to be focusing on the different districts, or the different identities of each district within the project area. Then we will be returning back to the State Street Advisory Committee shortly thereafter, likely in the early October timeframe, focusing more on the mobility transportation side of the project. And then in the fall, I anticipate going out for more general public outreach of some type. I'm not sure exactly what that'll look like, whether it'll be a survey or some other form. At that point in time, we'll be going out to all of the committees and commissions, similar to what we did during our first outreach phase. I think we did come to the Transportation Circulation Committee, I think it was back in November or December. So we'll be doing that again during that phase. Then we'll be taking all of those comments in and compiling a final draft plan, along with working on the implementation and management aspect of it. I'm anticipating a completion date still of sometime early in 2024.
Committee Member Blackerby?
Yeah, question for Ms. Grant. Obviously, at this committee, we're used to Vision Zero. I'm just curious, as people will have comments, I'm sure, but as we get into conversation about considerations, right, of what those what we'd encourage the State Street Committee to think of and what just needs to be thought of in general. Safety's mentioned, but I'm just curious, sort of what your and your team's thoughts and Public Works are about actually sort of introducing Vision Zero to the rest of the community, to this effort in general, because that's been a very clarifying guiding light and policy, I think, for this committee and for council since we adopted it. And so I'm just curious what your thoughts are about how Vision Zero can work into this.
Thank you that was a great question. It's the short answer is yes, absolutely. Anytime when we're designing anything in the roadway, Vision Zero needs to be utmost important. I just realized in the gigantic slide deck that I just showed you, I didn't have the Vision Zero mapping and where State Street was sort of on fire when it came to severe collisions. It's also hard too because that's where you see the number of highest pedestrian and cycling volume, so you will still have a little bit more than other areas. But certainly we can weave that into the presentation. And yes, it's at our top of mind when we look at this. There's not, or if there's some questions, and then I also want to make sure, Chair Malavos, that we have time for public comment as well before we go into any feedback.
And Committee Member Bickford comment, and then we'll go to public comment. Yep. All right.
Oh, it was green, now it's greener. Okay. My first comment goes back to the history issue. Before there was Paseo Nuevo, there was this, let's revitalize the failing downtown. And there were two choices. One was two anchors on various places in State Street, infill the retail with a mix of regional, local, and national retailers, or Paseo Nuevo, which everyone said would ultimately kill retail in downtown. And lo and behold, that's part of the problem. Part of the problem is that, at the same time, the merchants on State Street were speaking that they needed vehicular travel so that people would know they were there. There is a very simple answer to that issue, as what they've done in Santa Cruz, for instance, and in other places. On each block, a nice sign saying, on this block, on the east side, these are the merchants. On the west side, these are the merchants. On this side street, you can find these additional businesses to visit. And people would know where to go. Of course, now we have GPS and you can ask your phone, but it's kind of nice to have, elegant signage. And that hasn't been discussed as part of this issue at all. The other issue is the vacancies on State Street. It's often reported that it's, whatever the number is, but if you go down there, you will see that it's way higher than that. And one of the things that the property owners are doing, I don't know how much the city is in cahoots with this, but there are a lot of vacancies that have very nice storefronts that make them look like they're open, or at least that there's a business there, and there isn't. If you count in the 800 and 900 block of State Street, the vacancy rate is probably closer to 50% than 25. Merchants, and I know some of them personally, have been complaining that they can't afford to run their business here because the rents are so high. And yet we have property owners that refuse to lower their rents. They apparently can make more money on tax write-offs and leaving their place vacant, and everybody else suffers, the merchants and the community. Of course, you can't force the property owners to lower their rent, and they don't seem to be inclined to do so, but we can make it clear that we know what they're doing and shame them. Because, you know, it just shouldn't be that way. One other comment. The issue of bikes, e-bikes, etc., start off by saying that, first of all, cars and bikes don't mix very well. We know what happens when that's tried. So I like the idea of State Street being closed. I brought this.
Committee Member Bickford, I want to make sure that these are great comments, and thank you. If there's any other questions, because I do want to make sure we allow time if there's any members of the public wishing to speak, and then we can return back to comments.
Okay. I guess I could stop there. But thank you for listening.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so we can prompt to public comment, and then we can move back to committee comments.
Chair Malavos, we have one speaker request to speak form. First up is Heather Douche.
And to remind members of the public, we have 2 minutes for public comment, and I will go ahead and keep track of the timer. Okay.
My name is Heather Deutsch. I'm the Executive Director of Move Santa Barbara County, and I just wanted to... Just turn the button on microphone. I wasn't on. Sorry. And I wanted to thank you for putting together a great presentation, but also really address the question you've asked about being clear for everyone. So a couple of just thoughts that I had. One is regarding cost. So you had mentioned the cost of constructing parking. You might want to include some actual figures because most people don't really understand surface and structured parking and how incredibly expensive it is. If you have access to the numbers, it might also be worthwhile looking at sort of generated income for the city on a per square foot or per acre basis, downtown versus a suburban commercial area, right? Because, you know, with all that parking, you're losing all that, the city's losing all that money. Another item that I think might be really helpful for people is including details on cross-sections and widths. As was mentioned, this is often something that's confusing for people. So how wide is a car lane width? How much space does an ambulance need? What's a typical bike lane width? Along those lines, you use the term sidewalk to mean what in certain circles means the area behind the curb. But most people think of a sidewalk as the area where you walk. So when you talk about a 15-foot sidewalk, most people aren't thinking, oh, that's the tree box and the outdoor cafe. So just sort of either clarifying that or using what's the more conventional language for that. In the written documentation, when you talk about walking versus bicycling, I noticed that the walking description had a lot of really flowery language that didn't show up in the bicycling description. So we have under walking, this, you know, State Street, the design makes it ideal for walking. It's an ideal pedestrian environment. It's conducive to walking. it's enjoyable for walking, the architecture is pedestrian scaled. And when we go to bicycling, it says bicycling or bicycle lanes are included in the bicycle master plan. And that's kind of it. So I would just balance that out, go flowery with both. State Street's a great place for bicycling. It's the right length, et cetera. And
I'm sorry, George, if we're out of time on the public comment, but I do encourage you, phone call, yes, email, that these are fantastic comments. I really appreciate it, and really appreciate you attending the meeting tonight. But I'd love to have the additional feedback and notes as we move forward. Thank you.
Just because your mic was off, just state your name once more.
Heather Deutsch, I'm the executive director of MOVE Santa Barbara County. Thank you.
Thank you. Those were great points. Any other public comment?
Chair Malavos, we have one other person for in-person public comment and one raised hand through Zoom. So first is Sebastian Acona Jr.
Good evening. My name is Sebastian Aldana Jr. I've been dealing with neighborhood issues in public, not public, but capital improvements since about 2006. So time flies when you're having fun. But in the neighborhoods, the east and west, and I've asked this question before, so I thought I'd come over here, and I never got the answer. But in the east and west neighborhoods, many residents, they wanted stop signs, yield signs, even signal lights. But there always had to be a study and analysis to see if we can do that change, the request. Even right here on Coda Street, there was an idea of making a one-way with a bike lane, retain all the parking from Milpas to Garden Street. Great idea, bad results. And the bad results were the surrounding streets couldn't support the impact of the change. So, and I know this State Street was interim due to COVID. It just happened. But there's not a proper study and analysis to see how the surrounding streets are being impacted. And in my opinion, for what it's worth, the only way to do that is to open State Street, let the traffic flow, and then do a proper study and analysis. That's what the community, that's what we had to not tolerate, but go through. And I would think that the city would lead by example, but yet on the contrary, the city's not doing it. So I would just like to know why we are moving forward without a proper study and analysis. The community had to do it, but yet it just doesn't make sense, and I never got an answer. I'd just like to get an honest answer. I'm not against bikes. I'm not against this project. I just think we just need to start properly. The Americana brand in Glendale was a nice project. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. I think we have one more online.
Yes, so via Zoom is Sullivan Israel. Please unmute yourself and you may speak.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Sullivan Israel. I'm the leader of the local nonprofit Strong Town Santa Barbara, and we support making Santa Barbara more bike-friendly, people-oriented, and I just want to say short public comment today, but I agree with most things, pretty much everything Heather Deutsch said, and I appreciate you guys having this conversation today, including being more detailed about bikes on state, and our group supports bikes on state. I would also like to say I didn't see any language about bike parking. I would love to see that. I know it's a little bit of a detail, but especially with e-bikes, many of which don't fit in the old style of bike parking, but making sure that that's there in the future as part of the bike facilities. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair Malavos says there are no other speakers for public comment.
Okay, I think we can open the floor to committee comment. If there's anyone that has thoughts or notes to share. Committee Member Smith, please go ahead.
Yeah, this is a little bit muddled. Few kind of various issues. One, the last thing that came up during your presentation is you were weighing what to do with SOLA. And as somebody who drives down from that end, I live up there. It's like I never go down State Street to get downtown. I sometimes bike down State Street. I usually take other routes and then cross over further down. But I guess I was just gonna say, it's like, just find some way to discourage people from taking that route. I don't know what techniques you have for making things unpleasant for drivers, but Anacapa works better. Yeah. So, yeah, I wouldn't worry about that. One thing is, like, I've watched some of the State Street Committee meetings, and I know, we're just kind of watching people with they've had their own thoughts going in their head, and then they spew. I was kind of horrified at the vitriol that came out of people about, it was mostly about bikes, to be honest. But I know there are problems with like e-bikes going too fast, and that needs to be addressed. But I felt as if the State Street meetings were almost hijacked by, hate to say it, but people like me not wanting, when I say like me, like old white people, not wanting anybody else to use that street for anything but what they want to use it for. And I don't know how we get people to be more accepting, but I don't know, I was kind of embarrassed to be a Santa Barbarian, I guess. That said, the electric bikes, I think, are a big problem, and I think we need to think about what kind of regulations and enforcement and rules we have to keep the speeds down. I mean, I'd love to see kids having fun, it's like, that doesn't bother me. But I do understand that people feel unsafe with, I don't know, the other day I saw a kid riding his e-bike up State Street with, I don't know, his little sister or a girlfriend, basically skiing behind it on a skateboard and going side to side as hard as she could. And it looked like fun, and they were actually going at a reasonable speed, but I can just imagine that setting people off at the same time. So, yeah, I don't know how all that gets balanced. I do like seeing, like you see big family groups riding their bikes down the street, and just you see big smiles on their faces, and it's like, yeah, let's not take that away. So anyway, I do strongly feel that there should be a safe bike facility on State Street. I think, Derek, you made that very clear in that last State Street meeting, and you've explained it to me and to this committee. And I agree. Just by the way, we were talking about the survey, and there was one weird flaw in it, which makes me wonder, maybe maybe this didn't matter very much if you average it through everybody, but when I took the survey, there was like this funny way where if you were a bike rider, it directed you to a different set of questions. And the way you got there is it asked you if you ride your bike for recreation on State Street. And I don't ride my bike for recreation on State Street. I do chores. And so I answered that in the negative. And then my wife, who doesn't ride bikes hardly at all, it's like, for her, it's a big outing, you know? And she got all the questions about biking, and I didn't get any. And I don't know how many people that happened to, but it was just an odd thing. Let's see. Oh, yeah, just another thing I'm worried about and don't have a good answer to, but I like the idea that we're getting, you know, yes, let's put residents downtown, let's not pay for the parking spaces. That's all great, but there's going to be a transition period where the long-range transportation isn't going to keep up. I mean, Amtrak isn't going to get fixed in 5 years. People are going to need some kind of access to car-type transportation, whether it's like a car-sharing thing or what, but the city needs to think about that. I don't have the answer, but I do want to see all this work, and I want to see us have good public transportation. Oh, and I do have a question, which I could have asked in the question period. It sounds like if you need a lane for emergency vehicles and, you know, maybe truck traffic early in the morning, but where there would be, from the reading material, I guess there were going to be little places for them to park that aren't in that lane. And I was kind of wondering if part of that lane could actually be in, you know, half of the bike lane or something like that, if you can save space that way. And it's a question, I don't know if it would work out. But, I mean, I don't care if there's a truck going my direction at 8 a.m. in the morning. And if an ambulance wants to come up the street, I mean, you're supposed to get off the street anyway. You know, it's like, it seems like that could work and save space. Maybe. I think that's all I got. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, Committee Member Beckford.
If it's okay, I can do this in less than a minute. I think there's an equity issue that needs to be discussed, and that is the state makes it pretty clear that the cost of parking is an impediment to development. It's also an impediment to some people in the community. The concept of dynamic parking may achieve the results that were presented, but at what cost? And there is an equity cost involved. Some people don't care for the convenience of a couple of extra dollars. And yet for other people, you know, it's a cost they prefer not to or can't incur. So that's that one equity issue. And the other thing really briefly is about the e-bike issue. And I actually brought this up once before, so it'll be very brief, and that is we are failing to consider that one of the rationales for the bike rentals is to encourage the use of people outside the core of the city to get there by commuting. And in reality, the majority of the use of the bikes currently has to do with tourists. And in fact, it was mentioned very clearly in the New York Times article about 2 weeks ago. in 3 different locations within their presentation, it was all about, wow, you can bike around town for only $7 and da-da-da. I have no problem with tourists and our visitors using bikes and not driving their cars around. I think it's awesome. But we also have to recognize the value of the bike share program as far as encouraging people to get on a bike for commuting. That's all. Thank you.
Thanks. Actually, if I can, I have one question just to address the gentleman's question in the back around studies and all the research that goes on, because I know it's ongoing. And if I can ask Mr. Derek Bailey to touch on that subject, and if there's any insight that he can provide or research to share or where to go to for that type of information, just for the record.
Good evening, everyone. My name's Derek Bailey with the Public Works Department in the Traffic Engineering Group. Yeah, that's a very good question. And there's kind of a couple things to consider when studying the traffic effects of closing State Street. You know, everybody, their minds typically jump to what they see out on the street right now. And, you know, that was the first thing that popped into our minds as well is, okay, if you close State Street, what are the effects on Chapala and Anacapa? Surely, if you close one street, traffic is going to divert to the nearest streets. And we have been studying it, and we haven't noticed any increase in traffic on those parallel streets. There's a lot of dynamics at play because people's travel patterns have shifted pretty radically since prior to COVID, so that probably plays into it as well. So that is being studied. But Mr. Aldana mentioned the Coda Street project that happened a few years ago. You know, when Coda Street was studied, we didn't just look at what's happening on Coda Street today. You know, we also have to look into the future, and especially this is really important on State Street as we think about how State Street and downtown redevelops. We can't just look at what's going on with travel patterns today. We need to think of, you know, 20, 30 years down the road when there are another 8,000 housing units in Santa Barbara. What's circulation going to look like in Santa Barbara when there's another 8,000 housing units? So that's what we're studying. You know, like I said, what's going on today, Chapala and Anacapa are working just fine. But we really need to be thinking 20, 30 years into the future when downtown looks differently and how people are going to get around differently when there's potentially some pretty big shifts in land uses downtown.
Is there a location of past research findings or studies and where that might be publicly available?
It's ongoing right now because the city is updating what we call our traffic model. And so it's basically we have a network built of all the city streets. We have scenarios that are built into it. If certain areas of the city develop in a certain way, what do we expect the traffic volumes are going to be like in the future? So that model is just getting fine-tuned and finalized as we speak. So there's nothing available publicly yet, but that's the effort that the study is ongoing. So yeah, just to add to what Ms. Grant was talking about during the presentation.
Thank you. Any other comments from the committee?
Chair Malavas, we did get, it appeared one more public commenter online, if that's okay to just do one more pause just
think
for a
that's great,
couple
yeah.
minutes. Okay.
Please.
Okay. We have Kira Push with their hands up. Kira, please unmute and you may speak.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Well, I was just curious about the downtown shuttle, and I'm wondering, given that it sounds like the Chamber of Commerce has already recently gotten a new shuttle back up and running. I know they have more limited hours, but is there maybe a way that, or has it been at all discussed that the Chamber of Commerce could maybe contribute funds to bringing back the MTD shuttle, or maybe the MTD shuttle, if it is, brought back into play, could maybe be coordinated with the existing Chamber of Commerce shuttle, and money could be saved that way. It just given the fact that it was, kind of like a heavily subsidized program. That's all. I was just curious. Thanks.
Thank you. Is that something you want to say? Okay, so we'll move back to committee comment. All right, Committee Member Rodriguez.
Oh, my. This is a big steak to eat, or whatever, however you want to call it. I love the saying, you can only eat an elephant one bite at a time. So that's kind of what your project is like. I was involved in the general plan in 2011, and it was an exciting process. And there's so many things here that strike me as fascinating. At that time, the corridor, like Jessica talked about, along State Street was definitely well established, and the goal was to modify the planning department requirements, and it was reduced to one parking space, and it was supposed to make it much easier to build and create low-income housing, or lower-income housing, maybe have more studios, young people. And I don't think that's happened at all, and it makes me very sad, because although you talked about the number of housing units we have, my guess is they're all well over $1 million each, and they're not apartments for people who want to work downtown. So I'm bringing this up not to divert, but to point out that the vision for having a State Street for workers and for young people and for people fresh out of UCSB that are taking entry-level jobs, I would love to see it, and I don't know if it's going to happen. So I just don't know how many people with $1 or $2 million condominiums are going to want to ride the bus. So that being said, I was very encouraged. I watched, and I encourage my colleagues to watch the meetings, your May meetings, your two State Street Committee meetings. I would feel very unprepared today if I had not watched and seen your slides, because I missed our April meeting as well. There was one speaker that said there's absolutely no way you can convert downtown downtown industrial buildings into housing. It's absolutely economically unfeasible. And then there was another presenter who said it's been done in Boulder and Greenville, South Carolina, and Fargo, North Dakota, and Napa, California. So, that makes me optimistic. But anyway, okay, that speaks to refinements or details missing that would provide something better. I think we have a good backbone, but there are so many components of the whole issue that come into play that it's hard. We can give our little piece, but that won't guarantee that things will work out the way we'd like to see it. Okay, that being said, the one thing that I felt that I would really want to add, based on the meetings that I watched and based on 9 years of experience on this committee, the bicycle master plan is valid, it's viable, it stands. I want to see bicycles on State Street, period. Now, that's my comment for the long-range plan. In terms of the current situation, until 2026, we know there's a possibility that the State Street will be like it is. I hope this information goes forward to the city council somehow, my little voice. If we continue to have no bike lane in the middle of State Street, I think it's really rude to blame the bicyclists when they are given no directions. And I'm down there, I go with my husband, I go with my grandkids, and we walk around State Street, but I stay on the sidewalks because I never know when somebody's going to fly by on an e-bike, and there's no lanes. How can you expect people to be obedient when you haven't given them any directions? I'm very, very frustrated by that. And those little green sections went in very, very temporarily, and I didn't think it was adequate. It was just a little bit of a section before you got to the intersection, but it didn't continue. So I would really like to see a plain old bike lane right down the middle. You're gonna irritate some people, but I think you might if we don't do anything, it's just gonna build. The animosity and the anger is just gonna build and build and build until the final plan, which I think will be lovely, where you have sidewalks and bikes on one side and then maybe a lane for cars. You know, at the last meeting, I thought that model was excellent. So I got a comment about the interim, and I really think that's got to be addressed. And then pretending that that period is all happy and everybody's thrilled, then we build the new one. My personal comment on the new one is I would only like to see I would like a lane for vehicles, but I only want to see delivery trucks and shuttles. And I'd rather have it closed off the rest of the day and used as additional pedestrian space. That would be my dream State Street. Okay, that's it.
Committee Member Bickford?
Could you please put on the wish list to find a way of funding the shuttle so it could be free for passengers? I think that would be nice. And also to extend the shuttle to Upper State Street as well. Of course, that's another discussion for another time. And regarding the e-bikes and speeding on State Street, perhaps the city can consider, at least in the interim and certainly in the long term, hiring staff to be there and just educate the bicycle riders to slow down, stay in your lane. That's all. Thanks.
I'm sorry, I forgot one thing, important thing I was going to say. There is a state assembly bill now pending that I'm sure some of the staff people are aware of, that people under 16 cannot ride over 20 miles an hour. And I don't know if that's pending or approved. Barry would probably know, Barry Remus would know. But there is a pending assembly bill that no one under 12 years of age will be able to ride an e-bike, and if you're between 12 and 16, you have to take an online licensing test. So I think that's really going to be helpful if that passes for that whole issue. Okay.
Comment from Committee Member Siechlag?
All right. Okay, I think I have like a page and a half of my summary notes. So, first off, thank you, Ms. Grant, for an excellent presentation. I'm really glad that we're keeping, the city has approved keeping State Street as is for the next 2 years. I think this will help us get some of this post-pandemic information and impacts. I don't think we should assume that this pandemic period is normal operations and base our decisions on that. So I'm glad we're really taking our time and not rushing from one system to another, as one of our speakers said. I'm also really glad to see all of the housing options coming in downtown. We need more housing. We need to not expand and sprawl into the hillsides. And I think this is one of the, it seems doable. I don't know that it's going to be affordable, but maybe doable. I think my thoughts kind of sort of fell in the 3 different scenarios. So I'll try to not critique them exactly down to the detail because I know this is going to come back. But I believe it was scenario 3, which is the moving bikes to Chapala and Anacapa, to echo some of the other committee members. That's not what the bike master plan says, but that also just doesn't seem viable to me. I think it's going to reduce bike use, which would increase traffic congestion. I think it would kill the bike share program, which I think originally did start very much kind of like with it down State Street and on the waterfront was aimed in that way at tourists, which I've said before, but as it's expanded, I live in the Oak Park neighborhood, and I see a lot more people just around my neighborhood using it more. I think it is becoming more of a local program, and I'd really like to see how that continues to go for the next couple years. I almost kind of want, and this is kind of my like chaos suggestion, but if it did seem like, Sam's looking at me, if it did seem like either the State Street Committee or council was just really unhappy about bikes, you know, you don't have to like do new infrastructure to just put some cones or barriers up and close a lane. You know, we've done it on State Street. Like, you can close down a lane on Anacapa and Chapala and like put up no parking signs, and you could see what that impact was on parking and traffic. And I'm pretty sure, and I'm saying this because I'm pretty sure it would be a nightmare, and everyone would immediately figure out that, like, no, we actually do need, like, bikes on State Street, and that is the better option. But I think if it did seem like the city was going in that direction, I would really like to see that tested before we approved it based on a diagram. I know there's been some talk about, you know, what if like bikes were banned and people had to walk bikes on some portion of State Street. I don't know how many people are familiar. So I work at UCSB, and a section of bike path was just removed, well, a building, it was removed a couple years ago for a building that was constructed, and so the bike path has kind of been rerouted onto a road since then. And since the building has been reopened, it has been, everyone has acknowledged it has been a total mess of bikes are now biking through what was intended to be a pedestrian corridor. Some of the students I work with put out a survey, and the survey responded to all of those cyclists. It was like 98% say they wanted the bike path back where it was intended to be. But even the pedestrians, like by like 80%, say no, they would rather have a bike path there with the separation than kind of this like chaos, like you're supposed to walk your bikes, but no one does. So yeah, I think we have to have a plan for bikes on State Street. The one lane of cars where they're not making a left turn, and that's to like kind of, or yeah, to no left turns, only right turns because the bikes are on the left side of the road. I was trying to figure out, you know, if you're like, if you're a tourist and you look on Google Maps for the Apple Store, it's going to take you to the Apple Store. It doesn't take you to where you park for the Apple Store. So you're going to be driving down State Street, you're going to see the Apple Store, and then, like, what do? You, like, drive down, then you drive, you can only make a right turn, so then you make a right turn over to Chapala, then what do? You have to, like, loop back up Chapala, and then, like, cross State Street to the other side to Anacapa, and then find a parking lot there. And that seems worse. So, I just don't, yeah, I don't see that being good, along with a cars on State Street. You know, if we want this to be a community space, if there's children playing and having a good time, if you're sitting on a sidewalk table and there is a car idling next to you, it is gross, it is dangerous, it is loud, like, we've forgotten what that's like. And you can see even, you know, like the parklet at the press room got hit and no one was in it. I think there's another one, I think it's by like Roy's or something, but it's just, it's loud, it's unpleasant, it's just like, it's gross. Like, that is not what our vision is like having these like cars just kind of ambling through our community living room. I would like to see, I know it's not my thing, but I know a lot of people I always hear about the cruising, and that is a thing that people have an emotional attachment to. I would like to see in the sort of spacing of State Street, which I would like to see allow, you know, parades, all of the like modular activities. We could have like a
once every other month, like cruise night or something. And that way, if that's your thing, if that's your community, if you want to be part of the car culture in Santa Barbara, it can be a night. Families can come out, there can be food vendors, it can be like the actual cruising cars and not like I intended to go cruising and then I got stuck behind this like pickup that's 6 feet tall for some reason and I can't see down this like whole nice like way. So I think it doesn't need to happen every day. It could be an event and that would just be more pleasant for everyone. Which I think, you know, just kind of leaves us with, there has to be separated bikes and pedestrian access. I think our other committee member says we like have to give both bikes and pedestrians instructions on where to be. Anecdotal, this is super anecdotal, but I do feel like the teenagers on electric bikes are like, you know, they're not perfect, but like, I think they're better now than they were 2 years ago. I think as kind of our social norms have settled out and we're all like learning how to interact in public again. I just feel, you know, I see them like, as I was coming down here, there was a whole group of them all clustered up and they looked just like my little like scruffy friends hanging out at the mall in the late 90s. And like, I'm just really glad they have a place to be. And I do think that, you know, the electric bike explosion came on quickly and it was going to take time for people to figure it out. I'm not against regulation, but I also think we don't need to like freak out and ban them like it was, yeah, like it's not going to be just a total free-for-all forever. Let's see. I think there could be, yeah, emergency lane, bike lane, delivery lane overlap. I'm downtown, or I'm down on State Street early mornings, several times a week usually. The delivery trucks, they're everywhere, but they're also not like, there's not a million of them. They're not blocking the way. Like you could get around them, you could still be in the space. But they're getting their work done. They're doing entire construction projects right by Paseo Nuevo, and it's fine, and it's totally possible to have all those things combined without having it just be open all the time. And then again, I think, you know, this is getting detailed, but like I would love a surface that was like asphalt for bikes. It would be stronger for vehicles when they needed to use them, and then you could have like the nice pretty walkways for the pedestrian areas because it's more attractive and like asphalt feels like a road, and so I don't think you would get pedestrians walking on it as often if they had like the nice tiled area separately. Okay, last two very quick comments. For any shuttle that comes back, I mean, I don't see anyone doing anything differently, but just keep it small and electric, both for noise and particulate matter. And then parking, if we are doing some sort of dynamic system, which sounds great, going for equity, just please make something that will work for downtown employees that are working for 8 hours, 6 hours, some long period of time, which makes parking very expensive. And often they are working during, if they're like servers or bartenders, they're working at the peak hours downtown. And so we don't want them to pay surge pricing because they are working like when people need them most. And I think that's it for me.
Okay, thank you. Committee Member Blackerby.
Yes, thank you I know you put a lot of work into this history lesson, both the written and presented, and thank you for doing that. And, you know, it's good context for this committee, but I think it's going to be context that is not just the history part, but the actual sort of specifics about modes, facts and figures, things like that. I serve on the State Street Advisory Committee. There's a lot of, and this is natural, especially with regards to transportation and aesthetics, feelings, emotions. And that's natural because we're human beings and we all have feelings and emotions. Everybody has thoughts and opinions about transportation because they have transported themselves at some point in their life. They probably do it every day. And you can feel like an expert because you have walked, biked, taken the bus, driven. But of course, there are subject matter experts in these things. And even though I'm a planner by trade, I'm a total engineering fangirl. So I've because I've been on this committee for so long, I've learned all these things, right? When I brought up Vision Zero, that for me is a really important guiding principle to everything that I think about when we think about moving people in our city. And I think that's a very important thing to really lead off with, frankly, in whatever presentation is made to the State Street Committee. That, I think, has helped this committee. It's helped other advisory committees and commissions in this city better, and the council, certainly, better understand that there are certain non-negotiables, and the main one is safety, right? And Vision Zero is based on facts and, evidence-based practices. When we're just talking about feelings, emotions, opinions, experiences, right, the one that has created sort of a moral panic in town, right, is when I go downtown, I don't feel safe because there's e-bikes and there's a tween with his helmet unstrapped blowing by me and it doesn't feel safe, right? Totally valid feeling, right? Even though maybe we all have anecdotes, there's not like a good study about it other than we have some collision data, right? But that takes years to collect, but it's a feeling, right? And so that's what people go based on. Right now, and I so appreciate how Committee Member Rodriguez explained it, we're not giving anyone directions or instructions. How do I walk down here? How do I bike? The green lanes, minimal though they were at least a guidepost to go, hey, you, go here. And, unfortunately they were taken out because it was something at least. There are ways, and I keep saying this committee, there are ways to engineer our way to safety and to putting different modes in their places, right? There hasn't been really until the last State Street Committee meeting really any discussion about engineering or how things work. That's starting, I think the consultant's starting to figure out that they have to explain those things. When we think about the problems that are happening with, let's say, e-bikes specifically, cars, people who drive cars, there are lots of rules and laws, right, about how to drive a motor vehicle, what you're supposed to do. You got to get a license and everything. But as we all know, every minute of every day in every community, person driving a car does something stupid or dangerous, right? They text, they are not paying attention, they're eating a sandwich, they're putting on mascara, they're not paying attention to people around them, right? That's really dangerous. But we don't ban cars because of that, right? So what do? We engineer things to make it, maybe the lane width is a little less, maybe we have curb extensions that slow them down, we have enforcement, right? So we, in theory, if these folks are caught doing these unsafe behaviors, they're talked to or perhaps ticketed. We've got education, right? There's a whole bunch of education that goes on. The city spends plenty of money on educating all kinds of mode users, but about pedestrian safety, about vehicle safety, all that stuff. And that's how it works. That's how we make things safer, right? There can also be, part of the engineering for bikes can be the surface that you're riding on, right? You were talking about asphalt. It feels like a road, but also I've heard conversations about if it's a little more textured, that slows you down. Or if it chicanes a bit, and has to meander, that slows people down. We really can engineer our way out of the feeling of, oh my gosh, I've got, I'm walking in the middle of what's a street, right, without cars right now, and it's a free-for-all. for everyone. So I understand that it doesn't feel safe right now, and at times perhaps it isn't as safe as it could be, certainly, but I think we can get there. So I appreciate that there, I think, is going to be a specific transportation-focused meeting, because we've laid the groundwork on that committee about pretty much everything else, but the thing that has the most, that's the hottest topic, we haven't, right? And so I think that's going to be really vital, and I appreciate the folks who work for the city who do transportation all the time to be involved in that. One thing that Committee Member Bickford mentioned about the bike share, and I don't think it's the case that most trips are tourists, just based on what's been presented to us, unless they're all buying year memberships and monthly memberships. So it seemed to me, what I remember, because I think I saw that presentation like 4 times, is that the majority of rides were being taken by memberships, which is a good guess. It's local folks. Either way, love seeing people on those bikes. The shuttle. Ah, boy. Okay, so in my professional life, I hear and have heard for 3+ years how much people loved it. And, you don't know what you have till it's gone, it turns out. And the number of calls, emails, in-person interactions that I've had with people saying, oh, we miss it, bring it back. Locals, people from out of town who their tradition was take the train to Santa Barbara and then get around car-free. There was a whole car-free Santa Barbara project that was very active for many years to try to encourage people who are coming from out of town, don't drive, come and get around other ways in using the shuttle downtown. Personally, I think both my own opinion and what we've seen from public engagement input, MTD did a short-range transit plan last year, and there's a big pouring of input saying, bring it back. If it has to be on the side streets, Anacapa Chapala, fine, but we need a way to get around. Which sort of leads into a thing that I harp on all the time, which is accessibility and universal design. I use all modes, personally, and I'm able-bodied in this moment. And most people making these decisions are generally pretty able-bodied as well. And so we think a lot about how people get around, that people are getting around. When we visualize them, it's me. That's how I get around, right? And I don't need, I can walk 10 blocks, right? No problem, most of the days, right? Or I can bike, and I can make all these decisions, and it's just plug and play. But it's not the case for everyone. And I think that when we think about planning the surface, we've had conversations in the committee about curbless, with curbs, all that stuff. The flat, fun, and flexible concept, right, is important in that for people to be able to get around safely. But we also have to think about that in modes. And I see every day people who rely on public transit to get around in our city, and there's a huge gap right now that they really don't have a way to do it easily, conveniently, to get around downtown. And there are a lot of seniors and disabled people that live downtown. There's a lot. And I know because they call me and they tell me how mad they are that the shuttle isn't running. So that's really important. And when we think about, one thing I would add in your list of considerations on the last bullet point, it talks about important considerations for future transit service in the downtown area include the following: fleet type, vehicle and fuel, hours of operation, service locations, and safety of traveling in the right-of-way, whether within or adjacent to the plaza. Those are all great things, but I think accessibility has to be one of them. And there's different flavors of accessibility when it comes to transit, okay? So to just totally nerd out, there's the concept of a high floor or a low floor transit vehicle, okay? High floor is, it pulls up, you climb up steps. If you're using a mobility device, it pulls up, a bunch of stuff happens and it takes a really long time, but a lift comes out of the back or out of the back side and brings you onto the lift, up, in, and you're secured within. On a low floor vehicle, which is what is most public transit districts have gone to, it levels with the curb. If you're using a walker or something, you just roll on. If you're using a wheelchair, a ramp comes out, but it's all flat, right? And if you're not using any of those, there are not steps to trip up into, right? Risk managers all around really prefer a low floor vehicle. So those are other things there's accessible in sort of like the letter of the law, and then there's like truly make it easy for everyone at any stage or any age. So I think that's important to talk about for what we want to see, or what's an important consideration at least. Last thing about parking, I think the pandemic and what's changed with the promenade or plaza, things that a lot of us in here talked about for years and years and years before. Well, what do we do this? What can we do this? Can we try it? Can we close it? Whatever. COVID decided for us. The city made a move. Great idea. We're learning lots of lessons, but we can't unsee it now, right? And the things people thought would be major problems didn't materialize. When it comes to parking, the thing that I think is one of the coolest things that isn't even about State Street, because there wasn't parking on State Street, right, is throughout the community, other businesses, their parking lot, either in full or in part, it's just outdoor dining now, right? And the world didn't end. There used to be big fights about parking required for businesses, commercial businesses, restaurant, bar, shopping, whatever, and there's a certain amount of parking that's required because otherwise it'll spill into the neighborhoods or whatever. Like, it's fine. People are getting to the businesses, they're enjoying them, more people can enjoy them because there's more space for them, and to me, seeing that shows that maybe the panic about parking wasn't as, founded. And I think that also carries through to housing. Obviously, there's tons of information about what's happened in other cities forever about what it means. And one of the huge misses in the general plan, because it was around as well, was a total punt, frankly, on the TDM and on price parking on the street, which there's a lot of scientific, information about how that actually works from an equity perspective, right? Like, both equity and just generally, the idea is not every single person needs to park right in front of where they're going, right? They don't feel like they need to or whatever. If you're going to be there longer and you're an employee, you can get a pass, right? Which would be cheaper. You're not just going to feed a meter for the whole day, right? So I think that's doable, but it is important to talk about. And a lot of emotion goes into price parking also. 400 block, I totally get the circulation piece. It makes sense to me. That's probably a block I bike on the most. And it's a bit of a mess now. People actually totally park on that block also, the way that it's set up now, which is interesting. And then the 1300 block, when I see it, I think it's kind of a mess, to be honest. I haven't parked on it, but I've walked and biked and I guess probably driven on it. And to me, like, I don't know if any safety problems or things have happened, but the way that the parking is laid out seems like super ad hoc to me and like not well signed. And that blends into the Zero West block of Victoria, because that's a little dicey too, getting in or out or bike. I found myself biking down the wrong way because I was on State and I was turning to the public market and I was like, wait, no, I can't be here. hopped off onto the sidewalk, but it just wasn't super clear. So that's kind of a sloppy situation right now, which I think can totally be addressed. And I appreciate you coming to us on this stuff, because obviously we all have a lot of pent-up thoughts and feelings about these things, because it's been happening around us in the community, and it's kind of a big deal. So I think that's all I got. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comment from you?
I'm gonna put it in writing.
Okay.
Too many. Won't come out organized.
Okay. Committee Member Rodriguez has 2 items.
I apologize, but I have 2 other small things I want to add. One, just to comment that I really regret that the interim situation is such that we've had to talk so much about e-bikes, because this meeting is to discuss how we feel about the fundamental structure for the new State Street, which is several years down the road. And yet, I think it's really important to separate those conversations. And I just hope that the interim committee of the city council will address the bicycle safety issues in the present time, and get that off the table so that your State Street Committee can not be dragged down by that. And that's my statement about that. Now, in terms of the considerations for the State Street effort, I have one thing I'd like to add. I don't know the gentleman's name, but at your second meeting in May, a gentleman said something I thought was really terrific. We've always had the pedestrian stoplights on State Street, before when it was open. We had the in-between where we'd have a signal light and you could stop and you could walk across. Most of the time they were okay. A gentleman was killed, I remember, down in Lower State Street before the pandemic happened. A guy hit him, and even though the light was in favor of the pedestrian, but it didn't happen very often. And the gentleman who spoke at your meeting, I was envisioning, and I think he was too, we have our 2 pedestrian sides, then we have the bikes, and then we have a car lane that's not really used that much, but maybe for pedestrians a lot. But he was suggesting 1 or 2 crosswalks in between each major street, so that you'd have a break, and the bikes and the people would both be required to stop if they're, so if somebody goes and pushes the button, and maybe it would be one of those blinking pedestrian things that we have down in Cabrillo, which have been quite effective. Maybe those could be on State Street, and not just one in the middle of the block, but a couple. I thought that was very appealing, and it would really slow things down, especially if you come up with a design that has the meander, which I think is excellent. Thank you.
Any other committee comments? Okay, well, I've got a few. I think watching the State Street Committee meetings and the other meetings, I think it just kind of goes to show that there's a lot of moving pieces and ingredients in this recipe, and transportation and the bike element is only one of those. So I can only really speak to that, but I work right off State Street. I'm on Cannon Perdido and State, and on State for most days, walking with colleagues for work, and about half the office is also cyclists. So, get a variety of opinions on that. And one of the things is always, is it, biking to city center so they have a nice promenade of foot traffic, or is it, an open bikeway that also has these parklets and expanded foot traffic access to State Street? I think that's kind of an ongoing debate even within our small office. But I think one thing I'd like to see kind of a consideration of is just a proposal for a foot traffic section of State Street. Just from conversations I've had and traffic that foot traffic that I place on State Street, somewhere between, the 400 up to Carrillo, the 900 block of the state, of basically just being a foot traffic with, bike access above and below that as a, consideration or a proposed idea, just to have a formal development as to what that would actually look like if there was a pedestrian-only section on that lower section of State Street, just for consideration for the broader public. And I think for the broader public, seeing the survey results there, I think it would be very interesting to see a very, very detailed survey and study in terms of street by street. If we were to go by, what would be foot traffic only, or what would have bike access, what streets specifically, and at what points would there be a need for additional infrastructure like bike parking or, if there does need to be, what does the public have to say, basically, on a street-by-street basis, I think would be really, really informative. And then two, anything that we can do for, especially the quantification around parking, street traffic, especially with, the parking garages, which is, I think, used, I think we use it in our office, quite a bit. So like between that and especially with the, I guess, the variable rate for street parking, which is, I think it's the first time I heard of that idea, but that's just kind of seems interesting something to survey with the public, because then it's kind of, you're providing scarcity through the cost of the parking. So basically, I'd just like to hear more about what the public actually thinks about those things, and literally on a block-by-block basis, just to understand, what the public sentiment is, and if there is a sweet spot that identifies itself based on what the broader public has to say. Other than that, I think if I'm on my bike or on my e-bike and there's farmer's market on Tuesdays, it's not a big problem. You just take the side streets. It's not ideal, but I'm not going to go ride my bike through the farmer's market. So it'd be nice to hear even, you're talking about, compliance through just education or better signage. Does the farmer market have anything to say? Like, are they seeing, casual compliance with people walking their bikes on farmer's market day just because, out of consideration of people that are shopping for groceries? And so if behavior is proving to be, safe and compliant in that mode, then maybe there is a hope for kind of a self-compliance type of mode for e-bikes on State Street. I have kind of my reservations on that. I think basically we've entered a new era. Like, there's a difference between a pedal-powered human bike that versus an e-bike that puts out 2,000 watts. Humans don't put out 2,000 watts, and so it's no longer a bicycle. It's a silent motorcycle, and that's the reality of it. And so, self-regulation in terms of behavior with a silent motorcycle is, I think, yet to be kind of proven, especially as of recent years. So is that education? Is that engineering through infrastructure? I heard the one comment in one of the other meetings about almost like a chicane-type river down State Street, which, is that compliant with fire regulations and ambulance and all the sort of emergency services that need to get through. So I think there's lots of great ideas I heard through some of those meetings, and just various other topics I hear through conversations and folks that I think use the street and enjoy what we have today. So I think those are just kind of my suggestions.
Good points.
And that's all I have.
Well, I just want to thank you. This has been a fantastic meeting. I really appreciate the feedback and comments from the committee, what we've received for the public. Again, you've given, I think, our team lots to think about as we move forward for the yet continued conversations, and then again, just a little refinements before we go to the State Street Advisory Committee. So thank you for that. Thank you for, again, for your community service. And we're getting out here just before 8. So I think that's great. I appreciate the sticking through, and everybody, again, in the audience, whether you're here or from home, for watching tonight. And thank you.
Thank you. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So move.
I will second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Right.
Meeting's adjourned.
Thank you.